Roman DeLuca stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline of Manhattan stretching out like a dark, glittering map of everything he had conquered. His reflection in the glass was almost unrecognizable, an unyielding figure in a tailored black suit, broad shoulders squared, jaw tight. He exuded power effortlessly. To anyone who didn't know him, he might have appeared untouchable. To those who did, he was a force that bent outcomes to his will. And yet, tonight, he felt a tremor beneath that surface. A subtle, almost imperceptible unease. Something in the atmosphere told him that tonight would change everything. From the corner of the room, he saw movement. Glass. Shards scattered across the black marble floor. Leave. His voice cut through the silence. It was calm, but there was an edge, a tension that made even seasoned men hesitate. She was on her knees, hands shaking as they hovered over pieces of crystal, picking them up one by one. The maid, the invisible presence in his office for 3 weeks, had never before drawn his attention. Now, she seemed to consume it. The scar, she murmured. The words were almost lost in the echoing room, but Roman caught them, and they struck him like lightning. He froze, heart rate accelerating, his mind racing through memories he had carefully buried. Recognition clawed its way to the surface, an event, a face, a moment long thought lost. Her hands were trembling, yes, but not from fear. She was on her knees, yes, but she wasn't weak. She was deliberate, focused. She didn't flinch, didn't try to flee. And that scar, the jagged line across his left shoulder blade to his ribs, suddenly held meaning he hadn't dared to face in years. It had been 15 years. 15 years since a warehouse fire in Brooklyn had left him barely alive, buried under smoke and rubble. A boy no older than 12, helpless and forgotten by everyone who should have been watching. And now, the girl kneeling in front of him, she had been there. She had touched him, saved him, unknowingly shaping the man he had become. Roman's gaze sharpened. He stepped closer, but slowly, carefully, as though approaching a wild animal that might vanish if startled. He had spent years perfecting control over everything and everyone in his life. Strategy, power, fear, they were his currency. And yet, in this moment, he had none. Lyric, he said, his voice low, precise, but carrying a weight that made the name feel sacred. She looked up. Their eyes met. A spark, a flicker, 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. He saw shock, uncertainty, recognition in her gaze. He saw fear, but he also saw something he hadn't anticipated, authority. She had the quiet certainty of someone who had survived, who had made choices, who had taken control in circumstances far beyond her apparent station. Your scar, she repeated, her voice a whisper now. Roman's body tensed. The scar wasn't just a mark, it was history. Pain, survival, memory, a symbol of who he had been and what he had endured. 15 years ago, it had been raw, open, a map of flames, fire, and chaos. Now, it was a hardened reminder of what he had overcome, etched into his skin like a permanent warning to the world. And now, to him, a reminder that someone had seen him, truly seen him, at his most vulnerable. You know, his voice was rougher than intended. I remember, she said softly. Her eyes never left his. She didn't bow her head, didn't shrink away. I didn't know who you were until just now. The weight of her words hit him harder than any confrontation or threat. 15 years of distance, 15 years of hiding, and now she stood there, alive, present, and undeniable. Roman closed the distance carefully, watching her, studying the way she moved, the way she held herself. Every instinct told him to maintain control, to command, to assert dominance. But all those instincts were useless here. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a key to a past he hadn't faced, a bridge to a humanity he had long denied. You saved me, he said quietly, almost to himself. Not accusing, not demanding, just stating. Yes, she whispered. She shifted slightly, careful not to make sudden movements. I pulled you from the fire. I didn't know if you would survive. I never thought. Her voice trailed off, but the meaning was clear. She had carried the memory, just as he had. The room fell silent. The city continued its hum below, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing in the penthouse. Roman's mind raced, trying to reconcile the powerful, feared man he had become with the boy who had been helpless, who had been saved by this same woman kneeling in front of him. He noticed the small things. The way her hands were steadying themselves despite the tremor. The way her eyes held a mixture of fear and determination. The slight tremble of her lip that betrayed emotion she refused to show. Every muscle in his body was alert. Not because of danger, not because of threat, but because of her. Because of what she represented. A past remembered. A life saved. A secret kept for 15 years, now exposed. I don't understand, he said, voice taut with a tension he didn't bother to hide. Why didn't you say anything? 15 years, and you never told me? Her eyes softened, and for the first time, Roman noticed the subtle strength in her posture. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize beyond the initial instinct. She simply looked at him, honest and unafraid. I didn't know how, she said, barely audible. I didn't know if you survived. I didn't know if you'd even remember me. He closed the gap entirely, standing over her now, not with threat but with gravity. She could feel the heat of him, the presence of power tempered with uncertainty. The air between them was heavy, charged. You saved me, he said again, more firmly this time. And now you're here. Yes, she said, barely above a whisper. And I'm still invisible. You are not invisible to me, he said, the words precise and deliberate, carrying a weight that made her heart quicken. Not since the moment I saw you. They stared at each other in silence. Outside, the city moved obliviously. Inside, 15 years of history, of memory, of life and death, hung suspended. One glance, one word, one hesitation. Any of them could shatter the fragile understanding forming between them. Roman's hand twitched, almost unconsciously, towards the scar. He wanted to touch it, to confirm what he already knew, to anchor himself in the reality of the moment. But he stopped. Restraint. Respect. The balance had shifted, and he would not overstep. Not yet. Lyric's eyes followed the motion, and in them, he saw not fear, but recognition. She understood the weight of what had happened. And she understood that whatever came next, nothing could erase what had passed between them, what she had done, and what he had become. The room felt impossibly small, charged with history and potential. Roman DeLuca, feared, powerful, intelligent, morally conflicted, stood frozen, momentarily powerless in the presence of the woman he owed his life to. Outside, the city lights flickered indifferent. Inside, everything had changed. 3 weeks earlier, Lyric Bennett stood at the base of the chrome and steel tower, a worn leather bag clutched tightly under her arm, trying to convince herself she belonged here. She didn't. Not with her thrift store dress, scuffed shoes, and the fatigue that traced the lines of her face from endless hours working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on in her Queens apartment. The elevator doors slid open with a quiet hum, swallowing her into a space that screamed wealth and power. She tried to smooth the creases in her dress, straighten her back, and melt into the shadows, hoping no one would notice her. She wasn't supposed to matter here. She was supposed to be invisible. Are you the new maid? The voice was sharp, authoritative, and judging, as if measuring her against a standard she could never hope to meet. A woman in a perfectly tailored black suit stepped forward, scrutinizing her with cold eyes. Yes, Lyric managed, her voice steady despite the trembling in her stomach. Mr. DeLuca is particular, the woman continued, her tone clipped. Do not touch anything on his desk. Do not move any papers. Speak only when spoken to. And for God's sake, be invisible. Lyric nodded, swallowing the humiliation that came with being reminded of her place. Invisible, insignificant, replaceable. She had been invisible her entire life, but the sting of it still hurt, like a familiar scar under her skin. She had learned to accept it, but never to welcome it. The first week passed uneventfully. She arrived at 6 each morning, left before 7, and had little interaction with Roman DeLuca himself. She caught glimpses of him only through security footage, sometimes left running by the building manager, a tall, devastatingly handsome man in tailored suits, a man whose presence commanded attention without speaking a word. He moved like a predator with purpose, surrounded by men who looked capable of enforcing his will with nothing but a glance. Lyric's job was to clean, to maintain order, to be unseen. She wiped the black marble floors, polished the glass surfaces, and arranged furniture with quiet precision. She reminded herself constantly, this was her world to observe, not inhabit. But the city has a way of arranging fates, of nudging lives together, even when logic dictates otherwise. On the 8th day, everything changed. She was dusting the private study shelves when she heard voices, low, tense, the kind of anger that vibrated through the floorboards. She froze, heart hammering. Male voices. One was deep and commanding. The other sounded desperate, younger, panicked. Lyric's instinct screamed at her to hide, to retreat. But there was nowhere to go. The shelves boxed her in. Then the door opened, and he stepped in. Roman DeLuca. Closer, more commanding than she had ever imagined. The man she had only glimpsed on screens, whose reputation whispered through every borough of the city, was real, alive, and in the same room as her. He was even more striking in person. 6'3", lean muscle under a perfectly tailored suit, dark hair styled without a single stray strand, jawline sharp and precise, stubble meticulously trimmed. His eyes, dark, almost too black to read, locked onto hers. There was curiosity there, almost predatory, a careful weighing of her worth without a word spoken. "Who are you?" he asked, his Italian accent subtle but undeniable. I'm Lyric," she said quietly. "The new maid. I didn't know you'd be here so early. I'll leave." His hand shot out, stopping her. Not aggressively, not threatening, but with a force that was impossible to ignore. "Lyric," he repeated, tasting the name as if unfamiliar. "Unusual name." "My mother, she liked music," Lyric said, eyes downcast. She had learned long ago that the safest place in the presence of power was beneath its gaze. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." Her eyes snapped up, meeting his. Something passed between them. A fleeting, electric acknowledgement of recognition, curiosity, something dangerous and unnameable. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. 8 days, Mr. DeLuca. Roman's correction was soft but firm. "Call me Roman." Lyric hesitated. "That wouldn't be appropriate, sir." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No, I suppose it wouldn't." He studied her, and for the first time, Lyric felt entirely exposed, not in a humiliating sense, but in the way one might feel if someone could read every hidden chapter of their life in a single glance. "Carry on, then," he said finally, moving past her. His scent lingered. Expensive cologne, leather, something uniquely his that made her head swim. She kept working, but her hands shook, betraying her attempts at composure. Over the next 2 weeks, she noticed his presence more and more. He began arriving earlier, staying later, as if he existed in whatever space she was cleaning. At first, she thought it paranoia. Then, a realization dawned. He was watching her. Not menacingly. Observing. Measuring. Understanding. "You have a story," he said one morning, appearing in the doorway while she dusted his desk. Lyric flinched. I don't, Mr. DeLuca. My life's not interesting." Roman corrected her gently. "Roman. And everyone has a story. Everyone has a past. Try me." She hesitated, then, something in his eyes making her want to trust him. "I grew up in the Bronx. My mother died when I was 17. I've been working ever since, waitressing, cleaning, whatever pays. That's it. That's my life." "And what did you want to be?" he asked. Lyric's voice softened. "A nurse. I wanted to help people. College was expensive. Life didn't leave me a choice." Roman nodded slowly, processing. Not everyone gets to chase their dreams. She shrugged bitterly. Not everyone. Something in him shifted. Quiet understanding. Not pity. Not indulgence. Recognition. 3 days later, she heard raised voices from the office. Louder, more urgent. She froze, then acted instinctively. She entered just as a tense confrontation unfolded. A man stood close to Roman, his posture aggressive. But this wasn't about violence in the conventional sense. It was a moral, social clash. Roman's response was measured, deliberate. He positioned himself between the intruder and what he deemed vulnerable, Lyric. She intervened not with fists or weapons, but with conviction, courage, and clarity. It was the first moment she truly mattered in his world. From that day forward, the power imbalance began to shift. Not because he diminished his authority, but because she had proven herself capable of influencing outcomes, of shaping events with her presence, her choices, and her insight. By the end of those weeks, she was no longer just a maid. She was an integral part of his daily life, a confidant in the quiet moments, a witness to the delicate balance of control and vulnerability that Roman navigated constantly. She saw his humanity, and he, perhaps unknowingly, began to see hers. It was the morning of her 9th day at the Chrome and Steel Tower, a day that would mark the first time Lyric truly understood the weight of the world she had stepped into. The elevator ride felt longer than usual, her hands tightening around her cleaning bag as though it were a shield. She reminded herself that she was invisible, that her role was to keep the space immaculate and disappear again. The door to Roman's private office was slightly ajar. The polished glass reflected her reflection, and for a moment, she hesitated. Should she wait, or should she enter, as she had been instructed, silently and efficiently? She chose to step in, taking a deep breath, her heart beating with the rhythm of someone stepping into unknown territory. Roman was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, arms crossed, looking out over the city. The skyline was calm, but the tension in the room was palpable. There was a quiet intensity about him, a power that didn't announce itself with loud gestures, but demanded acknowledgement in every subtle movement. Lyric's eyes immediately caught something unusual, a scar, a jagged line running from his left shoulder blade down toward his ribs, partially visible beneath the edge of his unbuttoned shirt. She froze. Her mind flashed back 15 years. A warehouse fire in Brooklyn. Smoke choking her lungs, heat scorching her skin. And him, or at least the boy who would become him, lying amidst the flames, unconscious, bleeding. She had dragged him out, one hand on his chest, one on his back, try to shield him from the collapse around them. She had never known his name, never seen his face clearly. But she remembered the scar, shaped like lightning, seared into her memory. Now, standing before her, he bore the mark she had touched once in the chaos of that night. Her breath caught, and she faltered, almost dropping the polishing cloth she had been holding. Roman turned slowly, sensing her hesitation. His eyes, dark and sharp, locked onto hers. There was curiosity there, but also caution. "Lyric," he said, voice low and even, "why are you staring?" She swallowed, struggling to form words. The scar, the recognition, the flood of memories, she couldn't speak. He stepped toward her, and even though he didn't touch her, the air around him seemed to press against her, warm and commanding. "Look at me," he instructed. Her eyes met his, and, in that instant, something shifted. He saw her, not just the maid standing awkwardly in his office, but the woman who had saved a life all those years ago. Recognition flickered in his expression, followed by confusion, then something dangerous and unspoken. "Do I know you?" His question was cautious, measured, but there was a tremor beneath the surface. Lyric's chest tightened. She wanted to answer, to tell him the truth, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she nodded quickly, a gesture of both acknowledgement and apology. Roman's gaze softened slightly, just enough to make her feel seen without exposing vulnerability. "You've changed," he said, almost to himself. "You're not the same person He broke off, his expression tightening again, as if pulling back from a thought too risky to voice. She swallowed hard, feeling her heart hammering. The room felt charged, like the air before a storm. She wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the gap between them, to let him know she wasn't just some anonymous presence in his world. But fear and habit kept her silent. "You've been working here for over a week," he said instead, his voice steady. "I've noticed you. Not just your work. You." Lyric blinked. "Me?" She wasn't sure if she should be flattered, frightened, or both. "Yes. You carry yourself differently than most. There's awareness, precision, caution, strength." His eyes studied her closely. "I like that." Her lips parted, but no words came. He stepped closer again, and she caught the subtle scent of his cologne, leather, a hint of spice, something uniquely him that made her stomach twist. "Tell me about yourself." he said finally. Lyric hesitated. Most of her life had been a string of survival. Jobs, bills, exhaustion. She had learned to keep her story contained, to protect herself with silence. There's nothing to tell, Roman, she said quietly. I clean, I work. That's it. Roman's lips pressed together briefly, and then he said, no. Everyone has a story, and everyone matters, even if they don't know it yet. His words hung in the room like an unspoken promise. She felt the invisible weight she had carried all her life, the sense that she didn't matter, begin to ease, just a fraction. For the next several minutes, they stood in quiet proximity, exchanging short, loaded dialogue. He asked questions, not intrusive, but pointed, forcing her to reflect on herself. She answered cautiously, aware that every word carried more weight than it should. He didn't push, he didn't command. He simply observed, and that observation carried authority that no raised voice could replicate. Then, almost imperceptibly, the conversation shifted. He spoke of decisions he had made, choices that weighed on him, mistakes that he couldn't undo. Lyric listened, not as a maid, but as someone trusted to hear the unspoken. And in that space, she realized that Roman, the feared, intelligent mafia boss, was also profoundly human. Moral conflicts, regrets, and burdens wrapped tightly around him like armor. You saved someone once, he said suddenly, his voice breaking the quiet. Did you know what you were doing? Lyric's hand tightened on the cloth she was holding. She felt the memory rise unbidden, vivid and raw. I didn't know if he would make it, she admitted. I just couldn't leave him there. His expression changed subtly, a shadow crossing his face. Recognition, memory, the flicker of an old pain. That was me, he said quietly. The words were almost lost, but she heard them. Her heart stuttered. I didn't realize. You saved me, he said, voice low and steady, not accusatory, but with the weight of revelation. I never knew it was you. And now, he paused, eyes narrowing, as if trying to process 15 years of distance, of memory, of fate converging in this room. Lyric felt the enormity of it, the coincidence, the chance, the impossible timing of their paths crossing again. She wanted to step back, to retreat into the comfort of invisibility, but something inside her urged her forward. You don't have to, she began, but he cut her off with a quiet intensity. I don't know if I can go back, he said. I don't know if I want to. The scar on his side, the physical symbol of the past they shared, anchored them in reality. It was more than a mark. It was proof of survival, of history, of unspoken bonds that had carried through time. Roman stepped closer, careful not to touch her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. You matter, he said simply. More than you realize. Lyric's chest tightened. She had spent her life believing she was invisible, unimportant, disposable. But here, in this moment, the most dangerous man in New York was telling her otherwise. They lingered there, neither moving nor speaking, until the sound of distant footsteps reminded them both of the world outside the office. The moment fractured. Roman straightened, regaining the professional composure that his reputation demanded. Carry on, he said, voice firm, almost casual, but the tension in the room lingered, unbroken. She nodded, turning back to her work, though her mind was anything but on dusting or polishing. As she left the office later that morning, her hands shaking slightly, she realized something she hadn't admitted even to herself. She was no longer invisible, and neither, she suspected, was he. The days that followed Roman's first acknowledgement of Lyric were measured, deliberate, and charged with unspoken tension. She arrived at the Chrome and Steel Tower every morning with the same quiet diligence, but now her steps carried a new weight. She moved not only with the precision of a maid trained to be invisible, but with the awareness that she mattered, that someone powerful was watching, noticing, waiting. Roman's presence was constant yet unobtrusive. He appeared in his office at times she hadn't expected, standing by the windows with the city spread beneath him, or lingering in the hall outside her cleaning closet as though gauging her movements. At first, she had tried to ignore it, to continue her work as she had been taught. But slowly, she began to recognize the subtle ways he influenced the rhythm of her days. The way a meeting would be rescheduled so she could finish a task, or the sudden appearance of a cup of coffee placed quietly on the counter at her usual break time. Their interactions were brief, punctuated by short, loaded dialogue that carried more meaning than words alone. "You look tired," he remarked one morning as she dusted the shelves of his study. Lyric started, surprised that he hadn't noticed. "I've been managing," she said cautiously, avoiding his gaze. "Managing isn't enough," he countered. "You should eat. Sleep. You need more than this." His voice was steady, authoritative, yet there was a subtle softness she had not expected. She paused, considering her options. Normally, she would have nodded silently and returned to work, but something about his tone made her hesitant. I have responsibilities," she said quietly. "Family. Bills." His eyes, dark and unreadable, softened in a way that made her chest ache. "Then allow me to handle some of them. That's why you're here. Not just to clean, not just to keep things in order. You're here because I want you safe. Because you matter to me." Lyric froze at his words. They were simple, almost mundane in phrasing, but in the context of her life, they were monumental. Nobody had ever said she mattered. Nobody had ever looked at her and considered her safety as a priority. Not even her own family. Over the next week, Roman began allowing her into parts of his world that were usually closed off. He didn't hand her power. He didn't remove the responsibilities she had outside of this building. But he allowed glimpses, small threads of trust woven into their interactions. He showed her his schedule, letting her organize it, not as a subordinate, but as someone whose insight he valued. He walked past her quietly in the hallway without the usual detachment of a powerful man, and she realized he remembered details about her life she had never mentioned aloud. One afternoon, while she was polishing his office desk, a photograph fell from the top shelf. She caught it instinctively, her hands trembling slightly as she looked at the image. It was him, younger, sitting on a stoop with a boy barely visible at his side. The photo was black and white, edges worn, and it carried the weight of something private. Roman entered then, his expression shifting as he noticed her holding it. "You found it," he said quietly. I didn't mean to," she began. He moved closer, his presence overwhelming yet strangely comforting. "It's all right," he said. "That was a long time ago." His eyes lingered on her face, searching, as though weighing how much to reveal. "Do you see the boy?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. He looks small, fragile." Roman's lips pressed into a thin line. He is. That boy shaped everything about me. And yet, he's not the man I've become. Not fully. I've carried him with me, buried him under choices I shouldn't have made, paths I shouldn't have taken. Lyric's heart tightened. The raw honesty of his words, the vulnerability, was disarming. He wasn't demanding anything from her. He wasn't asking for forgiveness or understanding. He was simply showing her the parts of himself that even the world didn't see. "You've been carrying that alone," she said quietly, setting the photo back down gently. "You didn't have to. Not all of it." His eyes, dark and unyielding, softened in a way that made her feel as though she were peering into the core of him. "No one has ever said that to me before," he admitted. For the first time, Lyric felt a bridge forming between them. Not romantic yet, not physical, but a bridge built on recognition, on shared understanding, on the unspoken acknowledgement of each other's humanity. Over the following days, this bridge strengthened. Small moments became significant. He would glance her way during meetings with his associates, and she would feel the weight of his attention. He allowed her to organize his office in ways she saw fit. No instructions, no interference. He respected her judgment. He listened when she spoke, not just hearing, but considering. One evening, as she prepared to leave, Roman appeared in the doorway of the office. His tie was loosened, sleeves rolled up, and for a moment, she saw the exhaustion behind the carefully constructed armor. "Stay a moment," he said. Lyric hesitated. "I should get home," she said. "You don't have to leave yet," he insisted. "I want you here. I need your perspective." It was a subtle shift in power, a recognition of her voice as valuable, her presence as important. She nodded, moving to stand beside him at the window. The city stretched below them, indifferent to the quiet tension that enveloped the room. "You notice things," he said after a pause, not looking at her, just speaking to the space between them. "Things that others overlook. It's why I've kept you close, even before I knew why." Lyric's breath caught. She wanted to protest, to maintain the invisible boundary she had always relied on. But she didn't. She felt seen, and more terrifyingly, she felt wanted, not in a way that demanded submission, but in a way that demanded acknowledgement. "Roman," she began, but the words faltered. He turned, finally meeting her gaze. "You don't have to explain yourself," he said. "Just stay." And she did. In the days that followed, their interactions continued to evolve. He began inviting her into spaces that were personal, not professional. A quick conversation about a book he was reading. A passing comment about a memory from his youth. A question about her family, her past, her dreams. She realized then that she was learning about him, not as the feared Mafia boss, not as the man whose name inspired caution across the city, but as Roman, the human beneath the armor. And in return, he was learning about her strength, her fears, her resilience. Their connection was not explosive. It was careful, deliberate, a slow burn built on glances, small touches, shared silences. She was still the maid, and he was still the boss, but the power dynamic was shifting imperceptibly but undeniably. One afternoon, while dusting the shelves in his study, she noticed a small notebook tucked behind a row of books. It was plain, unmarked, but she couldn't resist opening it. Inside were lists, names, dates, reminders, but also sketches, doodles, notes in the margins. Personal thoughts, confessions in shorthand. Roman appeared in the doorway without a sound, and for the first time, she realized she had intruded into something sacred. "You found that," he said, his voice calm, almost gentle, but with an edge that reminded her who he was. I'm sorry," she said quickly, closing the notebook. "No, keep it open," he said, walking closer. "I want you to see that I don't hide everything, that there are parts of me that exist beyond this office, beyond my reputation. You'll understand me better if you see." Lyric nodded, her hands trembling slightly. She realized then that her presence mattered not just in a functional sense, but in a personal one. She influenced him subtly, gently, and he allowed her to. By the end of that week, Lyric was no longer invisible. She moved through the office not as a shadow, but as someone whose presence Roman acknowledged, whose opinions he valued, whose very existence had begun to shape his choices. And he, in turn, began to let the armor slip, just enough to let her glimpse the man behind the fearsome reputation. A man shaped by past loss, by careful calculation, but also capable of trust, of tenderness, and of restraint. The slow burn of their connection continued, measured and restrained. There were no declarations, no impulsive gestures, only the careful weaving of two lives into the same space, each aware of the other, each quietly learning that power and vulnerability could coexist if only they trusted each other enough to let it happen. By the time she left the office that Friday evening, Lyric felt a shift in herself. She was no longer just a maid, no longer merely surviving. She was part of something larger, something dangerous, but also profoundly human. And she knew, deep in her bones, that Roman felt it too. As she stepped into the elevator, she caught his gaze in the mirrored doors, and he gave the smallest of nods, an acknowledgement, a challenge, a promise. She pressed the button for the lobby, heart racing, knowing that their story was just beginning, and that the slow burn they were both navigating would not be easy, but it would be real, grounded, and unyielding. The morning was unusually quiet in the chrome and steel tower. Roman's office, usually buzzing with the subtle hum of assistants and whispered negotiations, felt almost sterile. He was seated behind his desk, reviewing documents with the kind of precision that made every detail feel like a potential threat or opportunity. Lyric entered with the usual tray of coffee, moving with practiced ease. But today was different. She sensed it before she even saw him glance up. Roman's jaw was tight, his fingers tapping a rapid, controlled rhythm on the wood. There was a tension in the air, the kind that made someone like her pause mid-step, almost imperceptibly. "Morning," she said softly, placing the tray down. Roman didn't respond immediately. He simply stared at the window, eyes narrowing slightly. "Someone's here," he finally said, almost to himself. His voice carried the weight of unspoken danger. Lyric frowned. "Here? Who?" He shook his head. "Not yet clear. But you need to stay out of it." She froze. That sentence, so ordinary, so commanding, carried a threat she had never experienced outside of Roman's presence. And yet, it was protective. He was warning her without explaining, as if trusting her to understand that she must stay behind for her own safety. The intercom buzzed, and an unfamiliar voice came through. "Mr. Roman Bellini? There's someone here to see you. They insist it's urgent." Roman's hand moved to his pocket instinctively, but there was nothing to draw. No gun, no weapon, just the subtle gesture of preparation. He exhaled slowly, then gestured for Lyric to step back. Moments later, the visitor entered. A man in a tailored suit, face neutral, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who believed he could control any room. He didn't bow. He didn't shake hands. He simply stepped into Roman's space and spoke. "I have information that will concern you, Mr. Bellini," he said, voice steady. "It's about someone you trust." Roman's eyes narrowed. Lyric noticed how his entire posture shifted, the quiet aura of power she had become accustomed to twisting into a sharp, coiled tension. "Explain," Roman said. The man placed a single envelope on the desk. No flourish, no dramatics, just the envelope. Roman's eyes flicked to it, assessing. He opened it slowly, revealing photographs, documents, and a series of short notes. Lyric caught her breath as she recognized the images immediately. Photos of her. Not casual snapshots, but moments of her life she had never shared with anyone in this building. Images of her family, her neighborhood, the modest apartment where she grew up. Roman's hand clenched around the paper. "Who sent this?" he demanded. The man shrugged. "Does it matter? The point is, someone close to you, someone inside your inner circle, is compromised. And if you don't act, it could destroy everything." Lyric felt a cold weight settle over her. Roman's eyes, dark and unreadable, flicked to hers briefly, and she understood. He had known she mattered, and now that mattered had made her vulnerable. She began, but Roman cut her off. "Stay behind me," he said, voice low. "Whatever happens, you do not engage. You do not intervene. Understand?" She nodded, though the knot in her stomach told her that doing nothing might be impossible. The visitor left after a terse exchange, leaving Roman alone with the envelope and the quiet hum of the city outside. He paced, the documents clutched in one hand, running the other through his hair. "This changes things," he muttered. "Everything changes." Lyric watched him, feeling both fear and a strange surge of responsibility. She had entered his world as an observer, a helper, invisible and peripheral. But now she understood that her presence, her insight, her perspective could influence outcomes. The weight of that was almost unbearable. Roman finally sat, leaning back in his chair. He picked up a small object from the desk, a silver watch, old but meticulously maintained. The symbolic object, his father's, inherited, a relic of past choices, felt heavier in his hand than it ever had before. He turned it over slowly, as if seeking answers in its worn surface. "This isn't just about loyalty," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "It's about judgment, trust, decisions. And I may have failed." Lyric stepped closer, drawn despite his earlier warning. "You haven't failed," she said carefully. "You're trying to protect people. That's not failure." Roman's eyes flicked to hers, and for the first time, she saw the flicker of vulnerability he rarely allowed. "Trying isn't enough," he said. "Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it doesn't matter how careful you are." The envelope remained open on the desk, evidence of unseen threats, potential betrayal, and the fragility of the empire he had built. Roman knew he had to act, but the method of action mattered. Violence, coercion, or manipulation were tools he used sparingly. But now, every decision carried consequences not only for him, but for the woman standing in his office, whose life was now entangled in his choices. Lyric understood then that she had a role to play, even without stepping into the conflict directly. She could read the people who came and went, notice discrepancies, understand the human patterns that Roman alone could not. And she realized she might be the difference between disaster and survival. Over the next few hours, Roman moved carefully. Meetings were rescheduled, communications rerouted, and subtle inquiries made into the man who had delivered the envelope. Every gesture was deliberate, calculated to uncover the truth without exposing vulnerability. He did not raise his voice. He did not shout. There was no gun to brandish, no force to exert. And yet, the tension was palpable, the stakes clear. Lyric shadowed him quietly, offering insights when he asked and otherwise observing. The power dynamic shifted incrementally. She mattered not because she carried weapons, but because she could think, perceive, and anticipate. And in that moment, Roman realized the truth he had resisted. She was indispensable. Hours later, after confirming the threat was not immediate but potentially catastrophic, Roman sank into his chair, exhaustion pressing on him like a tangible weight. He picked up the watch again, turning it in his hands. "You see, Lyric," he said quietly, "every choice I make is a risk. And sometimes the people I care about most are the ones in the greatest danger." Lyric felt her chest tighten. She wanted to say something, to offer reassurance, but words felt inadequate. Instead, she simply nodded, acknowledging both his burden and her newfound place within it. The room was silent, but the silence was not empty. It was heavy with understanding, with unspoken agreement, with the subtle recognition that their connection had evolved. The incident, the sudden, unexpected threat, had shifted the world around them. And though no physical violence had occurred, the danger had been real, tangible, and emotionally piercing. As Roman finally stood, walking toward the window, Lyric realized that this was more than a test of power. It was a test of morality, of loyalty, and of human connection. The inciting incident was not about bullets or brute force. It was about vulnerability, trust, and the courage to act with precision and restraint. He glanced at her, almost imperceptibly, and she returned the look. They were partners now, in the truest sense of the word, each relying on the other to navigate a world where one wrong step could destroy everything. And for the first time, Lyric understood that the Mafia universe she had stepped into was not defined by guns or explosions. It was defined by strategy, human psychology, and moral courage under pressure. And she, invisible no longer, had become a key player in its silent, dangerous game. The days after the envelope incident passed in a tense haze. Roman moved through his penthouse and offices with the measured precision of a man who knew every corner, every angle, every potential threat. Yet there was an undercurrent now, subtle but unmistakable. Lyric was no longer just the maid. She was present. She was relevant. And he felt it, even if he did not say it aloud. She had begun noticing the cracks in his world, the silent vulnerabilities that no one else could see. It was in the way his assistants avoided direct eye contact, the way security personnel hesitated when he gave instructions without speaking, the way certain men in the building subtly shifted when they thought he wasn't looking. Roman had always been aware of these dynamics, but now Lyric saw them too, intuitively, as if his meticulous observation had quietly become hers. That morning, she approached him cautiously, holding a notebook she had been compiling for the past week. It contained everything she had noticed since the visitor with the envelope: schedules, inconsistencies, the subtle cues that signaled shifting loyalties. She had hesitated at first, unsure if sharing this information would be welcomed or dangerous. But Roman's expression when he glanced at the papers confirmed her fears. He recognized immediately that she had become a part of his operational awareness. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. His voice was calm, but it carried that weight, the presence that reminded everyone around him why he was feared. Lyric sat, her hands shaking slightly, gripping the notebook tightly. "You've been watching," he said softly. "You've noticed more than anyone else. Even more than me, in some ways." She hesitated. I just pay attention. Things that seem unimportant to others stand out to me. I notice patterns, small things, the way people react under pressure." Roman leaned back, studying her. There was a flicker of admiration, quickly masked by his usual controlled demeanor. "And you've documented all of this?" "Yes," she admitted. I thought it might help. He picked up the notebook, flipping through the pages with slow, deliberate movements. Every note was precise, every observation careful. Roman's mind worked quickly, connecting the dots she had outlined, and he realized just how much she had seen. This, he said quietly, changes everything. Lyric blinked. What do you mean? I mean, he said, lowering the notebook and fixing her with a steady gaze, that you're no longer someone I just keep safe. You're someone whose judgment I trust. That makes you powerful. The word struck her like a physical blow. She had never thought of herself as powerful. She had been invisible, ordinary, overlooked. And now, in Roman's presence, she was something else entirely. The power shift did not happen overnight. It manifested in small ways. Roman began asking for her opinion on certain matters, subtle changes in scheduling, observing interactions, assessing loyalties. He didn't simply delegate. He shared his awareness, testing her capacity to perceive, interpret, and advise. One afternoon, a minor but potentially catastrophic situation arose. A vendor, who had long been trusted, submitted an invoice with suspicious irregularities. No one else in the office noticed it. But Lyric, reviewing the documents, caught the discrepancies immediately. She hesitated, then approached Roman, quietly explaining what she had found. He listened, his expression unreadable. "And you're certain?" "Yes," she said, her voice steady now, the fear from earlier incidents replaced with confidence. "I checked every line. If this goes unnoticed, it could cost thousands, or worse, it could signal a leak in our operations." Roman paused, considering. Then he nodded. "You're right. Prepare a briefing. I want this resolved quietly, without alerting anyone else." Lyric watched him work, orchestrating solutions without shouting, without threat, without unnecessary confrontation. She realized that power in his world wasn't about violence. It was about control, anticipation, and knowing when to act. And she was learning, slowly but surely, how to wield influence in her own way. That evening, Roman called her into his office once more. He closed the door behind her and gestured toward the chair. "Sit," he said. She did, hands folded in her lap. "You're becoming indispensable," he said. "I've always operated with precision, but he paused, searching for the words. "You see things differently. You notice things I wouldn't. That perspective, it's rare." Lyric felt heat rise to her cheeks. She had never been praised like this, and it unsettled her even as it made her feel seen. "I'm just trying to help," she said softly. "And you are," he replied. "More than you know. That's why this shift is happening. You matter, and that changes everything. You'll see things I can't, and in that you have power. Real power, not just survival." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the room became intimate without a word, without touch. She understood that the power shift was not just professional. It was personal. Roman's acknowledgement of her importance carried weight beyond any business strategy. The next days solidified her new role. Roman began involving her in discussions that had once been strictly confidential. Meetings were arranged with key advisors, and while she did not speak in public, she was present, observing, learning, absorbing. Her insights were subtle but effective, often guiding Roman to decisions that avoided conflict and minimized risk. During a private moment, he handed her a small symbolic object, a folded photograph of a younger Roman, taken in the neighborhood where he had grown up. The scar on his shoulder was faintly visible, a silent testament to past danger and survival. "This," he said quietly, "is a reminder. You see me as I am. Not just the power, not just the fear, but the man beneath it. That perspective, it's more valuable than any loyalty I've ever commanded." Lyric took the photograph, feeling the gravity of the gesture. It was trust, recognition, and acknowledgement all at once. And in that moment, she realized that the power shift was complete. She was no longer invisible, no longer powerless. She mattered in ways that extended beyond the practical. She mattered emotionally, morally, and strategically. This newfound importance was not without consequence. Roman's world was dangerous, and being visible meant she could be targeted. But he was meticulous, protective in ways subtle but profound. And she, too, began to understand the responsibilities of influence. Not to dominate, not to manipulate, but to observe, advise, and act with precision when needed. That night, as they stood in the office overlooking the city, Roman's hand brushed against hers. A brief, almost accidental contact. But it carried a message she understood clearly: trust, respect, and a shared awareness of stakes that neither of them could ignore. Lyric understood, then, that the power shift had changed more than her role in the office. It had shifted the balance between them emotionally. No longer was she simply a presence to be protected. She was now someone who could guide, influence, and be counted on. And Roman, the man feared and respected across the city, had to acknowledge that her value was not just in loyalty, but in the insight and judgment she brought into his dangerous world. From that moment onward, she moved with quiet confidence. Roman observed her from time to time, noting the subtle changes, the way she held herself, the way she analyzed situations, the way she anticipated consequences. He felt a rare, almost fragile respect for someone who had once been invisible, who had stepped fully into a world where few survived intact, and had done so with intellect, care, and courage. And though the external world remained as dangerous and uncertain as ever, the internal world between them had irrevocably shifted. She mattered. She had influence. She had power. And in the nuanced, silent ways of the Mafia universe, that was more dangerous and transformative than any or threat could ever be. The city below was quiet for the first time in weeks. The penthouse office, usually alive with the murmur of staff, the clicking of security devices, and the low hum of distant traffic, was still. Roman sat behind his desk, elbows resting on the dark wood, hands loosely clasped together. His eyes were on the windows, taking in the skyline, but the shadows in his expression told a story far darker than the night outside. Lyric stood near the doorway, unsure whether she should leave or stay. She had been summoned, though the word never came directly from him. She felt the weight of anticipation pressing against her chest, her own heartbeat loud in the otherwise silent room. Roman finally spoke, his voice low, rough at the edges. "You've been here, always present." He didn't clarify what he meant. She felt it was both a statement and a challenge. "I try to help," she said softly, her voice betraying more nerves than confidence. "You do more than help," he replied. He shifted slightly in his seat, elbows on the desk, his posture loose but controlled. "You matter, and I've been trying to ignore it because I thought it would complicate things, that it would be dangerous to let myself feel what I feel." Lyric's stomach tightened. The tension between them had been building for weeks. Every glance, every subtle interaction, every shared moment of trust had layered a quiet urgency, unspoken and forbidden. And now he was acknowledging it. "I don't understand," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What do you feel?" Roman's gaze met hers, intense, unflinching. "I feel concern, yes. Responsibility, yes. But something else. Something I've tried to ignore because it is reckless, dangerous. And yet, here you are, and I can't pretend it doesn't exist anymore." She swallowed, uncertain. The words were heavy, weighted with risk and unspoken consequences. "Roman, we can't. This isn't safe. Not for me. Not for anyone who matters to me." He rose slowly from his seat. Every movement was deliberate, measured, as if he were aware that his very presence could dominate the room. "You're already here. You're already part of this. And I can't." His hands curled into fists at his sides for just a fraction of a second. "I can't ignore the truth." Lyric shifted, stepping closer, though the distance between them was still measured. "Then what do we do?" Roman's eyes softened for just a moment. Vulnerability flickered behind his usual composure. "We acknowledge it, quietly, carefully, without letting the rest of the world know, without letting anyone use it against us. Because if they see what I feel for you, Lyric, they would consider it a weakness." She nodded slowly, the weight of understanding pressing down on her. "Then we keep it between us." "No," he said, and the firmness of his voice startled her. "We acknowledge it. We face it. We don't hide behind it. You are not invisible to me. Not here. Not ever again." For a long moment, silence fell between them. The room seemed to shrink, closing in on the two of them. Lyric could feel the intensity radiating off him, controlled, yet impossible to ignore. She felt a pull, dangerous and irresistible, the kind that demanded reckoning. Roman, she whispered, stepping closer. This scares me. He cut her off, raising a hand gently but firmly, guiding her so their proximity became deliberate, intimate. It should scare you. It should terrify you. But that doesn't change the truth. I can't pretend it doesn't exist. And I won't. Her breath caught. The air between them felt electric, charged with a tension neither of them had allowed before. The unspoken danger, the forbidden nature of their bond, amplified every second. You're reckless, she said softly, though her voice lacked the conviction she wished it had. I shouldn't. I can't. And yet, you are here, he said, his gaze locking on hers. You've always been here. Every time I needed clarity, every time I needed someone who sees me beyond what I've built, beyond what I've done. You were here, and now I won't let you be invisible to me. Not in my life. Not ever. Lyric's hands trembled slightly as she reached out, almost unconsciously, brushing a strand of hair from his face. The gesture was gentle, but it spoke volumes. Roman's eyes softened, and he leaned forward just enough that their faces were inches apart. I've been trying to protect you, he admitted quietly. Trying to keep you safe in my world, thinking distance would shield you. But it doesn't. You've already crossed that line. You've already mattered. And now, I can't hide what I feel. Her own pulse thundered in her ears. Roman, if this is true, if we do this, everything changes. Your world, my world, it isn't. I know, he said, his voice low, filled with certainty and caution. I know what it means, and I know the risk. But I also know this. I trust you. I trust you with myself, with my life, with what I've built. And I need you to know that trust isn't given lightly. Lyric's lips parted slightly, and for a heartbeat, words failed her. She had imagined many conversations, many scenarios, but none so raw, so immediate, so true. She reached up, letting her fingers graze his jawline, feeling the tension there, the control, the restraint. Roman, she breathed. I trust you too. And I think I felt this longer than I realized. From the first time you looked at me. From the first time I understood that I mattered to you. He interrupted gently, softly, leaning just slightly closer so his forehead brushed hers. Then we acknowledge it. Carefully, respectfully, dangerously, yes, but truthfully. And we do it together. The closeness, the acknowledgement, the raw honesty. It was a confession not of passion, but of recognition. It was intimate, tense, restrained. The room seemed to shrink around them, containing only the undeniable truth that they were no longer separate entities in this dangerous world. They were connected. Lyric's hands trembled as she placed them lightly on his chest, feeling the steady pulse beneath the tailored fabric. You don't have to say more, he whispered, his lips brushing against her temple. Understand. I felt it too, more than I dared admit. And now we face it together. Carefully, patiently, because what we feel, it's worth the risk. For a long moment, they remained there, silent, yet communicating everything through the weight of proximity, the softness of touch, the acknowledgement of shared understanding. The dangerous, forbidden, slow-burning connection was no longer theoretical. It was real, and the admission had shifted the balance. Roman finally stepped back slightly, just enough to allow space, but his eyes never left hers. We move forward carefully, he said, slowly, but truthfully, and I need you to understand one thing. Lyric, I won't let anything or anyone diminish this bond. Not ever. Lyric nodded, exhaling slowly, her heart still racing. I understand, and I want this, with you, despite the danger. That's why you matter, he said softly, almost to himself. Not just because you save me, not just because you see me, but because you choose to be here, fully aware of what it means. And that makes all the difference. In the silence that followed, the air hung thick with unspoken promises. No declarations of undying love yet, no flights of fancy, just a mutual acknowledgement of connection, respect, and the slow, deliberate step into a dangerous, intimate bond. Lyric realized, with a shiver of fear and anticipation, that the romantic confession under pressure wasn't about declarations or impulsive gestures. It was about truth, presence, and recognition. It was about standing together in a world built on control and consequence, seeing one another fully, and acknowledging the risk without flinching. Roman's hand brushed briefly against hers again, a silent vow, an affirmation. Whatever this is, it begins here, he said quietly, with honesty, with trust, and with the understanding that it will be dangerous, but we are stronger together. Lyric looked at him, and in that moment, she understood the stakes and the promise. Their slow-burn connection, born of risk, shared insight, and mutual respect, had reached a point where it could no longer be ignored. It was no longer invisible. It was no longer restrained. But it was true, and that truth carried more weight than any strategy, any plan, or any external threat. The night deepened around them. Outside, the city continued unaware, indifferent. Inside, two people navigated the complex, dangerous terrain of trust, attraction, and connection, careful, deliberate, and profoundly human. And for the first time, the emotional power between them shifted into the open, setting the stage for choices that would define both their lives. The office felt heavier than usual. Roman was seated behind his desk again, papers pushed aside, a glass of water untouched at his elbow. Lyric stood near the window, shoulders tense, eyes tracing the muted cityscape. The air between them was no longer tentative, no longer measured by the initial acknowledgement of trust. Something unspoken had shifted. Roman's voice cut the silence, low and deliberate. I need you to tell me something. The truth. Lyric froze, a subtle tremor running through her hands. The truth. She had shared fragments, hints, carefully curated stories designed to navigate his scrutiny. But there was one story she had kept buried. One fragment of the past she had never dared reveal. Because it carried weight, she was unsure she could survive alongside him. What do you mean? She asked cautiously, though her voice betrayed the tension in her chest. The truth about that night, Roman said, his eyes dark, unyielding. The scar on my hand, the one you noticed, you reacted differently than anyone ever has. I need to understand why. Lyric swallowed, feeling the weight of her own hesitation pressing down on her chest. That scar was more than a mark. It was a reminder of choices, of consequences, of a world she had left behind but had never truly escaped. And now, Roman had pieced together fragments that had always remained hidden. She began, her voice wavering. That scar, it's connected to someone I knew. Someone who mattered. I didn't think it would. I didn't think it would ever be relevant to us. Roman leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in expectation. Relevant or not, he said slowly, it's here now, and it matters. I need clarity. I need the truth. She closed her eyes briefly, collecting herself, forcing the words past the lump in her throat. Years ago, before you, there was someone close to me. A part of my past I try to forget. And somehow, in that chaos, your scar became involved. I didn't realize until recently, until I saw you again, that you were part of the same moment. That it was you. Roman's brow furrowed. You're saying this isn't just coincidence? That scar connects us to your past? Yes, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw you that day, after everything happened. And I didn't know. I didn't realize it was you. And when I did, her hands twisted nervously. I froze. I couldn't tell you. I didn't want to risk what we have now. For the first time, Roman's expression softened, not completely, but enough to show the human side behind the fearsome exterior. You've been hiding this from me because I wasn't sure, she said, turning toward him fully. Her eyes searched his, desperate for understanding. I wasn't sure if it would destroy everything, if you would see me differently, if you would see my life, my choices, and not trust me again. Roman sat back in his chair, the tension in his shoulders momentarily easing. He traced a finger along the edge of the desk, silent for a long moment, as if weighing every implication. Finally, he spoke. You should have told me sooner, he said quietly. Not because I'm angry, but because hiding it changes things. Hides trust. And trust is everything here. Lyric felt a shiver pass through her, a mix of fear and relief. I thought I was protecting us. Protecting you. Protecting what we're building. You were protecting yourself, he said bluntly, though without judgment. And I can't fault that. I understand. But now, the past is here, and we have to deal with it. Together. Her pulse quickened. Dealing with it, how? Roman's gaze was steady, unwavering. We confront it. Not by running. Not by hiding. You tell me everything. Every detail. No omissions. And then we decide together what it means. Lyric nodded, swallowing hard. She took a deep breath, and for the first time, spoke fully of the past she had kept locked away. She recounted the events, the night of betrayal, the people who had manipulated her, the choices she had made in desperation, the person who had marked him, the scar, the moment of collision, the unintended consequences that had shaped both their lives in subtle ways. As she spoke, Roman listened without interruption. No flashes of anger, no gestures of disbelief. He simply absorbed the story, the full weight of it, the connections between past and present, and the risks it implied for their fragile, evolving bond. When she finally fell silent, drained by the admission, Roman remained quiet for a long beat. Then, slowly he spoke. So it's not just about you, or me, or what we feel. It's about the people who made decisions for us, decisions that weren't ours. And now we inherit the consequences. Lyric nodded, biting her lip. Yes, and I need you to understand. I didn't choose this. I didn't choose the mistakes of the past. But I am here now, and I choose you. Despite it all, Roman's expression softened, tension giving way to the first hints of something like understanding. You choose me, he repeated, even knowing the risk, even knowing the potential betrayal. You choose this. Yes, she said firmly, meeting his gaze. I choose us, and I won't hide from the consequences anymore. Not from you, not from anyone. For a long moment, silence fell between them. It was heavy, not oppressive, but full of significance. The past had been revealed, the truth laid bare, and with it came a subtle shift in power dynamics. Lyric was no longer simply a participant in his world. She was an active agent in shaping its course. She had the power to influence outcomes, to alter decisions, to demand recognition of her voice and presence. Roman finally leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk, eyes locked on hers. Then we move forward, he said, measured but resolute. Together, but carefully, because the past isn't done with us yet. There are consequences we can't ignore, and enemies we may not see. But your truth, it matters. And it changes everything. Lyric felt a mixture of relief and fear. She had laid bare the secrets she had carried for years, and while the revelation was risky, it had also liberated her. The bond between them, already complicated and slow-burning, now had depth shaped by honesty, trust, and shared consequence. You're not angry, she whispered, almost incredulous. I'm cautious, Roman replied. Cautious and aware. But I'm not angry. You trusted me enough to speak, and that changes the nature of what we have. It's stronger now because it's real. No illusions. No pretenses. Only truth. Lyric exhaled, a small smile flickering across her lips. Real, she repeated softly. Even if it's dangerous. Even if it's complicated. Roman nodded, a shadow of a smile touching his lips. Complicated. Dangerous. Real. That's what matters. And now, we prepare for what comes next. The night stretched on outside the office, indifferent to the human drama unfolding within. But inside, two people had faced betrayal, past secrets, and unspoken fears. They had emerged not unscathed, but with a bond forged in the fire of truth, a bond that would be tested by every challenge yet to come. Lyric understood, finally, that their connection wasn't about convenience or circumstance. It was about choice, about deliberate commitment, about standing together despite the ghosts of their pasts. And Roman, she saw the shift in him, the recognition that his power, his world, and his heart were no longer separate. They intersected with her presence, her truth, and her courage. The revelation had changed everything. And in the quiet aftermath, as both considered the uncertain road ahead, they realized the truth. Sometimes betrayal doesn't destroy a connection. It strengthens it, if both parties are willing to face it with honesty and courage. Roman finally spoke again, voice softer now but firm. Tomorrow, we deal with what comes next. Tonight, we let the truth settle. And we let the past teach us, not control us. Lyric nodded, a small sense of calm settling in her chest. Tomorrow, she repeated, we face it together. And for the first time in months, perhaps years, both felt the fragile, dangerous reassurance of a bond unbroken by secrecy. The past had been revealed. The betrayal twist had landed, but it had not destroyed them. Instead, it had reshaped the foundation of what they were building, with honesty, courage, and trust at its core. The calm after the revelation was fragile. Roman and Lyric had faced the truths of their pasts, but peace never lasted long in a world defined by power, secrets, and human ambition. By morning, subtle signs of disruption began to surface. Messages left anonymously, hints of someone watching their movements, a whisper in the corridors of Roman's network. It was no longer about the past. The present demanded attention. Roman paced in his office, hands in his pockets, eyes sharp and restless. Lyric had insisted on staying close, not out of fear but choice. And for the first time, Roman noticed the subtle confidence in her stance, the quiet assurance that she belonged in his world, not as an accessory, but as a presence whose insight mattered. They're testing us, Roman said without preamble, turning toward her. This isn't random. Someone wants to see how far we'll bend before we break. Lyric met his gaze evenly. And will we bend? He allowed a brief smile, fleeting but real. Not a chance. But we need to anticipate. We need to prepare. The threat was intangible at first. An unexpected meeting canceled, a shipment delayed, rumors of whispers in the lower tiers of Roman's operations. Then, subtle provocations emerged. Someone tampering with logistics, a respected confidant offering advice that seemed slightly off, just enough to plant doubt. The tension was psychological, precise, and unrelenting. Lyric, who had always observed and analyzed before acting, began connecting threads that even Roman hadn't noticed. Her perspective was unconventional, grounded in instinct rather than authority, and it exposed vulnerabilities Roman had taken for granted. She noticed inconsistencies in schedules, timing of communications, and even body language among his closest associates. You're right, Roman said one night as they reviewed notes together. I didn't see it. You've noticed what I overlooked. His words were both acknowledgement and gratitude, tempered by a professional restraint that always lingered in his voice. The external threat escalated in subtle but impactful ways. A trusted partner questioned Roman's judgment during a strategy meeting, testing his patience. A rival attempted to sway an ally with a promise of opportunity, trying to fracture loyalty from within. Every challenge was psychological, requiring precision, intuition, and unflinching composure. Lyric began taking a more active role in countering these subtle manipulations. She met with partners under Roman's guidance, carefully planting observations and asking probing questions that exposed hidden motives. Roman observed quietly, aware that she was navigating terrain even he had underestimated. Her presence was no longer peripheral. It shaped outcomes, altered decisions, and influenced the balance of power without a single act of violence. One evening, as the city lights glimmered through the blinds, Roman found Lyric reviewing files alone. He entered quietly, observing her concentration. You're learning fast, he said, voice low. She looked up, a faint smile playing at her lips. You can't underestimate the quiet ones, she replied. Or the overlooked. He nodded, impressed, but also aware that this subtle dance of strategy was exacting a toll. The external threat wasn't just about undermining his position. It was about testing their trust, their patience, and the bond that had formed in the shadows of their pasts. The turning point came when a trusted advisor presented false evidence of betrayal within Roman's circle. The information was convincing enough to create friction, but Lyric's insight prevented an overreaction. She uncovered the inconsistencies, tracing the manipulation back to its source, a minor player seeking leverage, underestimated and ignored until now. Roman exhaled, tension easing slightly. You saved us from making a mistake that could have cost more than just control, he said. Lyric shook her head. We saved each other. That's the difference. The revelation strengthened their connection further. Each act of careful reasoning, each insight she contributed, deepened Roman's respect, not the fear-driven respect of his subordinates, but an acknowledgement of equality, of shared stakes. The slow-burn trust between them matured into a partnership forged under pressure. The pressure mounted. Roman faced a choice that would define not only his empire, but the integrity of his relationship with Lyric. The external threat demanded a decisive action, a move that could either consolidate his power or compromise the trust and respect he had cultivated. He stared at the documents on his desk, options laid out with cold efficiency. Each path carried consequences, each decision affected people he valued, and each outcome risked either consolidation or loss. He had faced many moral challenges before, but none as personal, as human, as entwined with someone he respected and desired. Lyric watched quietly. She understood the weight of the decision he faced. Her presence was both a grounding force and a reminder of what was at stake beyond the world of power and influence. You don't have to do this alone, she said softly. Whatever you choose, it doesn't have to cost everything we've built. Roman considered her words carefully. For the first time, he was weighing love, loyalty, and human connection against control, dominance, and authority. His mind traced every possibility, but unlike before, there was no automatic path. He had to account for her presence, for her influence, for the subtle ways she had changed outcomes without ever resorting to threats or violence. The choice became clear. He could secure his position at the expense of others. Further isolation, risk of internal fracture, and moral compromise, or he could extend trust, delegate power, and accept vulnerability, relying on the partnership they had formed. The decision would define the kind of leader he would be, the kind of man he wanted to be beside Lyric. I choose this, he said finally, voice measured but resolute. We move forward together, with transparency, with trust, and with respect. I'll rely on the people who've earned it, and that includes you. Lyric's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. And I'll be here, she said simply, not as someone to protect, but as someone who matters. Equally, the moral climax had arrived, not in bloodshed or domination, but an acknowledgement of humanity, respect, and mutual trust. Roman's choice demonstrated that power without connection was hollow, and that the strongest empires were built not on fear, but on loyalty earned through integrity and recognition of those who mattered. The weeks following the moral choice were transformative. Subtle shifts in the network signaled that trust and collaboration, rather than isolation and intimidation, strengthened Roman's position. Allies were more committed, subtle threats were mitigated through dialogue, and Lyric's influence reshaped decisions with clarity and insight. Their personal bond flourished alongside professional stabilization. They met daily, sometimes in silence, sometimes in conversation heavy with plans, reflections, and mutual acknowledgement. Every shared moment was a reminder that intimacy didn't require dramatics. Sometimes it was measured, understated, and profoundly impactful. Lyric's past, once a source of potential division, became a foundation for empathy and strategy. Roman learned to navigate his world with nuance, guided by her insight and perspective. The scar, once a symbol of past conflict, now represented the intertwining of their histories and the resilience of trust forged through honesty. Together, they faced challenges, made decisions, and maintained a balance of power and respect. Violence, once an assumed tool of influence, was replaced by strategy, observation, and dialogue. The empire remained intact, stronger not for the threats endured, but for the humanity recognized in those around them. Months later, Roman and Lyric stood together in the same office where revelations and decisions had defined the course of their lives. The city stretched below, indifferent to human drama, yet they knew the battles they had faced were significant, not because of the threats themselves, but because of how they had chosen to respond. Roman's hand rested lightly on the scar that had once symbolized danger and loss. Lyric's eyes lingered there, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had passed between them. It's been a long road, Roman said quietly. It has, Lyric agreed, and it's not over. But we're here, together. A single symbolic object, a photograph of a moment from the past, tucked into a frame on the desk, reminded them that history shapes the present, but doesn't dictate it. They had survived challenges, revelations, and moral tests without compromising the essence of who they were or the respect between them. As night fell, they left the office together, not running from threats, not hiding from consequences, but walking forward deliberately, aware of the world, aware of each other, and aware that trust, integrity, and choice were the most formidable powers they possessed. And for once, the city's quiet hum wasn't threatening. It was a rhythm in which they moved together, fully present, fully human, and fully aware that the strongest bond is the one forged not through dominance, but through understanding, respect, and shared courage.